Wife is out getting laid right now. I never imagined being here, but here I am. Our daughter, age 13, and my wife, 38F, visited her mother this past weekend. We decided it would just be a girls' weekend for them since I couldn't get the time off work. I work as a firefighter in a sizable southern city, and as I'm getting ready for a call, our dispatcher calls to let me know that there is an emergency. I pick up my phone because I'm not really needed on the work call and discover a ton of texts from my child and a few from numbers I don't have saved to my phone. I receive about 11 text messages before I find out that my daughter went ice skating, fell, and broke her wrist. Because no one has been able to locate my wife, she is in the emergency room but cannot receive treatment. A friend of my wife's who has gone to the emergency room to sit with my child is at the number that I don't know. She served as the skater's chaperone for the outing. So I call this friend, and after much deliberation, she finally admits that wifey has been out to dinner with an arbitrary man. Because of my job, we always depart from the location we share with the family. It turns out to be a ducking hotel when I look up an address on Google. It was 10 p.m. She still hasn't responded to my texts nearly 4 hours later, but she did finally call our child. She received a cast and a referral to see an orthopedist when she gets home, and I have her permission and insurance information. The friend texted me after returning our daughter to her grandmother's house. She apologized for making you learn about a guy's name. In this manner, it seems that every time she has gone home, I haven't followed. To pay off our house, take us on nice vacations, and send our daughter to the most expensive private school in our city, I have worked countless hours of overtime in the meantime. I'm stupid. Redditor's reactions. Next story after. Redditor 1, lawyer and file for divorce. Redditor 2, when she gets home, force her to explain to your daughter where she was and what she was doing while your daughter was in the air. Have a bag packed for your wife and send her to go live with. A guy's name. Redditor 3, you're not a fool, buddy. Your wife is. You were doing your family duties and working hard for your L's life. I guess all the family knows now, at least, what kind of son your wife is. Send your wife back to her parents. Redditor 4, I'm truly sorry. What a shithead your wife is. You understand what to do. Keep a copy of every text you exchange with that friend. Hire an attorney. Do not flint. Tell as many people in your circle as possible if your attorney clears you, so she can't dictate the story. Be persistent. She'll work hard to get you back. If App is married, inform your spouse. Focus and work on you. Never allow her to sneak back in. There are a lot of stories in this section that you could browse for hours. Look at the people who made amends and accepted them back. It stays the same. Everyone believes they are unique or special. They aren't. Story 2. They framed me. They fired me. And that's how they ducked themselves into a divorce, a prison sentence, and a handful of deportations. This is a lengthy article, but if you read it through to the end, you'll discover how I was falsely accused of being a criminal and fired from my job, accidentally causing a staff shakeup that resulted in the departure of several managers or transfers to other restaurants, the divorce of the general manager, the FBI investigation and arrest of one manager, and the deportation of a number of employees. Let's begin. I once had a job at a high-end eatery run by a sizable corporation that also owned several different restaurant brands. Before I was ultimately let go, I had worked there for about 3.5 years. I'd like to start by outlining my responsibilities there. At that job, I did a little bit of everything. I made it my mission to learn everything I could as soon as I started working there. When I wanted to learn a new department, I was very persistent with management. I began as a server, but over time, I moved up through the ranks and acquired positions in carry-out, hosting, bartending, bar backing, banquets, catering, and delivery. Making myself available for as many hours as I could was my one and only objective while working there. Although it varied depending on whether I was working as a bartender or server and receiving tips, I was being paid about $12 per hour. Management eventually realized how well I suited one of the non-tipped positions. Since carry-out, catering, and deliveries were all handled by the same department, they decided to give me a shot as an unofficial supervisor over the team. I negotiated with management to raise my pay by about $1.50 because I knew this would ultimately mean working a few fewer hours since I would only be working one department. They were happy with the pay increase because I was taking on more duty. I just wanted to be able to pay my bills and have some money left over for some fun, not to get as much money as possible. It was challenging for me to make ends meet and still have money left over to enjoy my life because I was residing in the heavily taxed city of Chicago, which is located in the already heavily taxed state of Illinois. It didn't cost much money to make me happy because I am a person of simple pleasures and can savor things for a long time. I could focus on a video game for weeks, months, or even years.
It was considered an additional expense because I had brought a family pet to Chicago. I started working here as the unofficial supervisor not long after I got a girlfriend, so I started going out more and spending more money on her.
I was able to afford everything thanks to my job and some careful budgeting. Money wasn't an issue, but management had a high turnover rate, making it difficult for new managers to understand what each department did or how crucial hours were to its employees. Our current general manager was eventually informed that he or she would be fired and replaced. When it came to enhancing restaurants, the new general manager was expected to be some kind of rock star. When we searched Google for his name, he came up as the top result. The entry, however, did not contain some glowing assessment of his work ethic or his exemplary capacity to enhance a restaurant's operations. It turned out to be a mugshot and a police report for ongoing domestic violence. Later on, this will matter. Harvey will be his name. One of our best managers resigned soon after Harvey arrived and began making changes. She declined to collaborate with him and, like a ducking oracle, warned us to anticipate estimual harassment, remarks that were derogatory to women, and the eventual ruination of this establishment. Shortly after she left, our general manager started hand-picking former co-workers to replace our current managers. In the end, all but one manager were changed. The kitchen manager was that person. We'll refer to him as Fredo. Since I began working there, Fredo had been there. He appeared to be somewhat chameleonic in that his morals and principles appeared to shift based on who his boss was. In all honesty, I kind of admire his instincts for survival, but I still think of him as a coward and a traitor. Harvey never really took over as our department's manager, so we operated with little supervision. We didn't have anyone constantly hovering over us telling us how to do things, unless you count me as the boss. Although there were a few blips here and there, our department overall operated very efficiently. We frequently had to radio for a manager to come help us with things that required a manager card for approval because we did not have our own manager. Since the kitchen was closest to our department, Fredo would always be the one to answer these calls. Over time, the new management group began to consider Fredo to be also the department manager. The hourly team there still regarded me as their manager, though. This meant that the team depended on me to prevent disasters or to negotiate with Fredo so that we could carry out our duties in the manner that we had already demonstrated to be extremely effective whenever he tried to make changes that would ultimately hurt us. Over several months, Fredo and I repeatedly butted heads. He and I would frequently argue about how crucial hours were to the staff in this division. He believed that we ought to be living off of tips like servers, but since most of our orders were for takeout and were placed through Grubhub, which doesn't tip, he was mistaken. We didn't make many deliveries in a day, and if we were lucky, the tips we received from those were only $10. However, $10 divided 4 ways doesn't amount to much. It only demonstrated Fredo's ignorance of the subject at hand. A meeting with our Harvey, Fredo, and all of the members of this department staff was eventually held. It was promoted as an opportunity for us to express all of our complaints and worries about the changes they wanted to make without fear of reprisal. So that's what the employees did. Despite the fact that Fredo isn't our actual manager, they discussed how he was attempting to cut hours. The team suggested that I take over since I had already been overseeing them and keeping things running smoothly for the previous few months, when it was mentioned that they were trying to hire someone to be the manager. I was also the one who management consulted when creating schedules because I knew which days some employees could and couldn't work depending on their family and couldn't work depending on their family. And I could see at the moment it was suggested that Harvey and Fredo made the decision on the spot that I had to be gotten rid of. Although they didn't say it, I could see the look they gave each other and instinctively knew that my days at this place were numbered and my job was going to be getting the axe one way or another. They promised us repeatedly that they wouldn't cut hours. As this wasn't a small department, and there was simply too much for one person to do alone while still adhering to health and safety standards, they promised us that they would stop sending everyone but one person home early and only leaving one person to clean everything and close up by themselves. They assured us that we would report for duty at the appointed time. We informed them that we typically have 3 or 4 people scheduled to work our department because we weren't attempting to be unreasonable. They could remove 2 of them early, but to close properly, we always required the presence of 2 people. They agreed that they would always have a minimum of 2 closer. Only a week or so later, though, they resumed sending everyone but 1 person home early every night. They attempted to do it one night when I was supposed to be the closer. We had just come from a sizable catering event, and there was an incredible amount of cleanup that needed to be done for just 1 person. I stood up and told Fredo that he was repeatedly breaking the promise he had made to us during the meeting when he tried to send everyone out except for me. He gave me a direct look in the eye and told me to stop whining about it because he could easily find someone to cover my shifts if I persisted in trying to talk to him about him breaking his promises. I quickly understood that this was an attempt at my professional assassination. He explicitly asked me to pursue it. I then took a step back and began to clean. I had to stay way past my scheduled departure time, which required overtime pay. We aren't allowed to work overtime without a manager's approval, so I got written up for it. I was only allowed to leave without signing the write-up because the AR representative present at the time wasn't one of Harvey's allies. When I refused to sign it and pointed out that I had tried to explain to Fredo that I wouldn't be able to clean up all that stuffalon before my scheduled shift. Ended. Let's fast forward to the day I was let go. I should mention here that I always arrived at work an hour early. We had to pay a lot for food because we lived in Chicago. On the other hand, at our job, we were free to eat as much soup and bread as we wanted. In order to have some soup and bread for lunch before my shift, I would therefore arrive at work an hour earlier each day. But on this particular day, as I entered the kitchen to get some soup for myself, a line cook informed me that Fredo had instructed him to give someone the dish he had that had been canceled after it had been cooked. He assured me that Fredo had already comped it and that anyone who wanted it could take it for free. I gladly accepted the complimentary food because the appetizer was one of my favorites. Soon after I arrived at my booth, Harvey and Fredo came over and questioned me about whether or not I had purchased a ticket for that food. I explained to them that I had received it from the line cook and identified it as the canceled order that Fredo had already compensated for. Fredo expressed confusion and said he didn't understand what I was saying. Harvey then remarked, "I think you realize that's theft. Go ahead and finish the meal, and after that, grab my things and leave. You will eat here just once more, at that meal." They wouldn't listen when I tried to explain that the line cook had given me this food, so I offered to take them to the kitchen to discuss it with the cook. He had already left for the day by the time I had returned to the kitchen with them to speak to the line cook. I was first to gather my belongings, bid everyone farewell, and leave for home. I explained what had happened to the people working in my department that afternoon as I was leaving. They were surprised and incensed, but mostly they were sad to see me go. To make sure I didn't lose that money, I made the decision to stop by the accounting office on the way out and pick up any tips that might have been left for me that week. I just set my phone to record before going down and put it in my pocket while the video was still recording. Despite the fact that the video was completely black because it was in my pocket, I was able to record Harvey and Fredo's voices through the door as they talked about how everything had gone according to plan and how they had been attempting to get rid of me ever since the meeting with my department. They hushed before opening the door when I knocked. When they inquired as to why I was still working there, I offered my advice. They gathered my belongings from the safe and gave them to me. Despite the fact that what I had just heard made me more enraged, I chose not to cross this bridge just yet because I might be able to douse it with nuclear power in the future. I gave both managers a handshake, thanked them for the chance to work there, and then turned to leave, making sure to take my phone out of my pocket and take a picture of the restaurant's front with the sign displaying its name and logo. A restaurant job teaches you to always cover your own ass. Although this is true for the majority of jobs, something told me that I would need this information later. In case it ever came up in future job interviews, I wanted to be able to refute any theft allegations made against me. That's exactly what happened, and that's where things really got out of hand. I posted on a few local Facebook groups while riding the train home to let people know that I had recently been fired and that I was looking for work as soon as possible. I had scheduled an interview for later that day by the time I arrived at my stop and got off the train. 5 minutes into the interview, I was given the opportunity, but after hearing the details, I decided it wasn't the right fit for me. After conducting a few other job interviews, I discovered one that was a damn good fit, offered a significant pay raise over my previous position, and excluded customer contact. An audit was being conducted for a logistics company. However, the hiring manager for this position mentioned in the interview that he had already called and spoken with Harvey, the general manager, at my previous place of employment. I had even fired someone for stealing, according to Harvey. Fortunately for me, the manager I was speaking with during the interview asked me to elaborate on that, and he was open to letting me take out my phone and locate the recording. I questioned whether the voice he used on the phone and the voice in the video was the same. It was. He had enough reason to believe that I hadn't fabricated the video after seeing that. He watched the entire video, including the part where I showed the front of the restaurant, complete with the name and logo, and listened to the two managers in it admit that they had set me up. When I was being interviewed by the manager, who we'll call Dean, he hired me right away and asked me to send him the recording. I did. That, in my mind, was the end of it. After settling into the position quite well, I sent out a welcome all our new team members email about 7 months later. The email listed all the most recent hires, included information about them, and included pictures of each one. Every time they made a new round of hires, they sent out these. Thomas was one of them. He and I had previously worked together at the restaurant. I was quite happy to see someone I knew and liked joining the team because we had previously worked together at the host stand. I went to his desk to say hello and inquired about his departure from the restaurant. He hadn't voluntarily left. Because the company was under investigation, he had been fired. It had begun as a relatively minor issue. The business that owned the network of restaurants had obtained an email with a video attack. From inside my pocket, I had recorded my video. That was sufficient justification for corporate to send an internal investigator. There had been numerous attempts to contact me, so Thomas was quite surprised that I hadn't heard anything about it. As soon as he said that, I opened the old email account I had used to make my initial restaurant job application. I received at least 20 emails requesting my presence to talk about my employment and termination. I didn't respond. I simply stopped caring enough. They couldn't have reached me by phone because I had since changed my number. Thomas went on to say that before corporate sent someone, Harvey and Fredo had spoken with my department and attempted to give them all a small pay raise in order to give corporate the impression that I was incapable of doing my job and failing to fulfill my obligation. There had been a minor exodus from my old department on the day the corporate auditor arrived. They made sure to expose Harvey and Fredo before quitting on the spot in front of the corporate lady. Let's call her a Tidry. For the two of them, a strike. After Audrey had shown Harvey and Fredo the recording that started it all, there was a second strike a few days later. Although they vehemently did, Harvey's voice could not be mistaken. It's special. In addition, the video captured their and my voices as we shook hands and parted ways amicably, which was something they had already boasted about to Audrey because they believed it made them look better that we could part ways amicably. This wasn't the real second strike. When it became apparent that they needed to be separated, Audrey transferred Harvey temporarily to the position of manager while sending Fredo to work at another restaurant owned by our parent company. This shattered them. The strain of the investigation must have driven them over the edge. They had once been an unbreakable evil team. They ultimately came to blows with one another on Facebook in a public post on the business page. The comment had since been removed, but Thomas provided the following explanation. Harvey made a passive-aggressive remark about how Fredo shouldn't even be in the photo because he had been transferred to another restaurant as a result of misconduct after Fredo was pictured in the Facebook post on the restaurant page. After reading this remark, Fredo remarked, "At least, I don't come up as the guy who punched his wife when people Google my name." "Very funny from the guy who was cheating on his wife with Janet's sister," Harvey retorted. "After firing me, the unofficial supervisor, they appointed Janet, not her real name, to officially supervise my old department." "Like you haven't tried with half the waitresses," Fredo responds. "Everyone has a story about you trying to avoid them." The post was removed, but not before Audrey, the auditor, saw it. Officially, that was a second strike. Strike 3 came the following day, when Audrey began questioning the bartenders and waitresses who were serving women to see if any of them could confirm that Harvey had made an attempt to seduce them. They were all individually interviewed, and several of them shared similar experiences. Every girl who admitted Harvey had made an attempt on her said he had promised to be their sugar daddy in exchange for sending nude photos or staying after the club closed to have fun with him. Harvey lost his job. The worst of it, though, is not that. Audrey the auditor wasn't just any corporate employee. She had personally hired Harvey's wife to be the general manager of another restaurant in the city. She was the former regional manager for this region. She informed Harvey's wife, who worked at the restaurant where she had done this, of everything she had learned from the female waitstaff. Later, we discovered that they had separated due to his attempt to cheat on her after she had already given him another chance to do so, following his beating of her. After something like that, I'm not sure what made her decide to give him another chance, but she most definitely did not give him a third. Audrey interviewed the line cook who had given me the food after firing Harvey. I'm not sure how it came up, but he had mentioned that he was an authorized immigrant at some point. She pressed him for more information because this confused her, and she had his file in her hand, which contained an Illinois ID and social security number. It turns out that Fredo had some connections and operated a small-scale black market where he would have phony identification documents and social security cards made for the legal immigrants he was employing at low wages. At least 4 years had passed since it began. This is a felony. That much is clear. She felt foresty to notify the authorities due to the potential nightmare she was probably facing, since some of the evidence took them outside the purview of the local police. The local PD requested assistance from the FBI. After being detained, Fredo quickly divulged the names of the workers he had sold IDs and social security cards to. I'm not sure if he gave up all of them, but he did mention 14 people by name, and by the time Thomas was fired, at least half of those 14 had been deported. One of them happened to be the line cook who had served me food the day I'd been let go. Thomas continued by saying that although I was fired as the catalyst for the entire situation, I never forwarded the recording to corporate. Only after Dean hired me had I sent it to him. When I questioned him about it, he admitted that he had sent it to his wife because she worked as a lawyer. He sought to determine whether I had grounds for suing my former employer because of what they had done. But he also recalled that I had said I wasn't the kind of person who would try to make millions off an entire company because of the errors of 2 of CA shoals when we had first discussed it. However, I had also added that it would be amusing to watch them lose their jobs as well. Therefore, it was his wife who forwarded it to the legal department at the corporate headquarters of my former restaurant job. My boss showed it to his wife, who then sent it on to the actual top brass at my former employer. They were both just trying to get 2 jerks fired for what they did to me, but they wound up dragging the situation out so long that it didn't end until there were allegations of estimial harassment, information about managers having extramarital affairs with the wives of those they had put in, positions of authority, a divorce, mass layoffs while investigations were ongoing, a reorganization of the staff, and an FBI investigation into possible black market transactions involving forged government documents. I'm not sure if this qualifies as nuclear revenge, since I didn't go out looking for it. However, Thomas was able to convince me that even if it wasn't retaliation, it was still nuclear, and the crater it left behind was sizable. Correction, I apologize for the long sentences.